Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Maya Eaglin in for Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, battered, a weather-worn California now facing torrential rains and deadly flash floods, the likes of which some local officials say they haven't seen in decades. And now it's prompting widespread evacuation orders. Also this morning, millions are under dangerous flood and wind advisories as tens of thousands remain without power. We're tracking this latest round of severe weather and ongoing rescue efforts in the hardest hit areas. Under review, the Biden White House playing defense this morning after it was revealed that the Justice Department is now examining documents, some classified, from the Obama-Biden administration found in an office once used by Biden before he became president. How the current administration is responding amid a high-stakes visit to Mexico. Also this morning, release day, that bombshell new tell-all memoir from Prince Harry, finally hitting store shelves today. But what's in it that we don't already know about? The growing royal rift. We'll dive in just ahead. And grateful, a week after that shocking on-field scare that had an entire nation holding its breath, Buffalo Bills safety Demar Hamlin out of an Ohio hospital and back in New York this morning. We've got the latest on his condition and his message to fans.
Hard to believe that just a week ago we were wondering if he was even going to survive this. Now he's recovered, he's cheered his team on to victory, and now he's back in Buffalo.
Yeah, to see his progress has been so heartwarming.
Exactly.
We're going to begin this morning with that latest on the devastating series of storms slamming the West Coast.
This morning, more than a dozen people have been killed from this system. More than 65 million Californians are waking up under a weather alert. Strong winds toppled trees and knocked out power for thousands. Leaders at California utility company PG&E called this its largest response to bad weather to date. The heavy rains are forcing many rivers and streams over their banks. In Ventura County, firefighters used a ladder and rope system to rescue people stranded by a flooding river. Tens of thousands along the state's central coast were given the emergency order to evacuate as floodwaters closed streets, swept away cars, and washed away roads. We're going to begin with Kelly Hubbard. She is the director of the Santa Barbara Office of Emergency Management. Kelly, thanks for joining us. I know you've probably had a long night here. Your area has been hit hard. We're seeing these flood alerts, these evacuation warnings across the state. First of all, just tell us, what's the situation like in your area right now?
Good morning. Thank you. Sure. This morning, we've actually had a little bit of a respite, a little bit of slowdown in rain. And what we're looking at is in the next couple of hours, much more rain coming again, the next band of heavy rain. And so really hoping our residents are continuing to hunker down or stay in the evacuation shelters and shelter in place if that's where they're at.
With more rain coming, just how concerned are you right now? And what are your biggest worries?
Yeah, a lot of concerns. We had a lot of impacts to our roadways, including Highway 101, a lot of our evacuation routes. And so hoping residents really stay inside, go to high ground if they are concerned about any safety, or stay at those shelters that they may already be evacuated to. Mud and debris is all over the place on the roads, in our creeks and rivers. Rivers are flooded. And in many places, the river that you pointed out in Ventura is right below us, causing breaks and people not being able to even get home. And so we're sheltering residents, workers who couldn't get home, and travelers who are coming through the area.
Do you feel like most people there are heeding your warning right now and are getting to higher ground, are trying to get to safe places?
We think so. It's hard. We can't even get into everybody. We do have some roads and closures that are blocked by mud flows and debris into the roads and streets. And so really just getting the messages to those we can't get to stay inside, go to that high ground. And from the calls we're getting, we think they're doing that.
Looking behind you, I can see what's either a bed with pillows or a couch with pillows right now. I'm guessing you might be spending the night where you are, as are many. I mean, how are you coping right now? How are the people you're working with, all the emergency response teams, coping?
Yeah, I think everyone's doing the best they can. This is my office. My bed is my sofa that can lay down for a few hours if I can get it. And I think that's what everyone's trying to do. We have first responders who are sharing hotel rooms, bunkering down, and then going back out, drying off, trying to warm up for a little bit. And so, this last night into this morning was also the 5-year anniversary of the 1/9 debris flow. And so it's a very anxiety for a lot of our community members who went through this 5 years ago in the Montecito area. And so really trying to support our community members. Our call center has community wellness volunteers in there as well to help with that anxiety, to not only answer questions about evacuations, but to help with those concerns too.
I mean, with that anxiety in mind, whether they're thinking about that Montecito mudslide from a few years ago or whether they're just looking outside right now and seeing what's happening there, what is your message to people who are scared and maybe those who don't know what to do right now?
Sure. To listen to local public officials as they communicate. I know some of the protective actions continue to change as it's a very dynamic storm. And so, just really listen to what the messaging is for your community. Make sure you're registered for those emergency alerts and you're checking for our community. It's readysbc.org is our website, and having them check those. And if they're in other communities, checking the websites and the local media for the most current information on what they should do.
All right, Kelly Hubbard, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We are thinking about you and the millions who are impacted by this right now. Please stay safe.
Thank you.
So what is next for the severe weather out west? Well, let's check the Morning News Now forecast.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now for more. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning, guys. And unfortunately, it's more of the same. We are looking at a really tough day once again. Looking at all those pictures with Kelly, we're looking at a really difficult situation. Really heavy rain, up to 7 inches in some spots, even up to a foot in some spots. Heavy mountain snow, also really gusty winds. I mean, look at some of these pictures. We're looking at roadways washed away, landslides, mudslides, saturated ground, swollen lakes, creeks, rivers, and that's going to continue. We've been watching this pattern since late December. We're going to continue to watch this pattern at least over the next 10 to 15 days. So it's not just one event, it's event after event, and that's where we're seeing so much trouble here. Today, 32 million people under a flood watch. That means a flood watch or a flood warning. Where you see the red, that is a flood warning. We're looking at high rainfall rates falling over that really wet ground. So the risk for major river flooding does continue, as well as road flooding. That's going to wash out some more roadways. It's going to make for really tough travel. It's going to cut people off as well. And we're looking at the chance for more power outages. Add on top of that, we have snow in the forecast as well. We're looking at very heavy mountain snow, up to 6 feet in some spots. So these alerts extend all the way from California into portions of the Central Rockies. We do have a winter storm warning. That is in the pink. So the highest elevations seeing the highest amounts of snow. Adding on top of that, wind alerts, 33 million alone in California. But if we spread it across into portions of the Rockies and also the Southern Plains, we're looking at 37 million people impacted by a wind alert. This is a problem because we have really wet grounds. We have a lot of trees in portions of Northern California. Those trees are coming down. It's bringing down the power. So we're going to see power coming in and out in many spots today. We already have so many power outages. This is a setup for today. Another onslaught of storms. We have a conveyor belt of moisture once again. The next round of rain is going to bring rain, snow, pummeling California. Kelly mentioned they have a little bit of a reprieve. We're going to see another wave moving onshore. That's going to bring a renewed risk of flooding down trees and also landslides. Looking towards tomorrow on Wednesday, another storm moving in, so there's no break in between. We're going to see an elevated risk for mudslides, flash flooding, and damage, and unfortunately adding to the pictures that we're already seeing. Thursday, a little bit of a break for Central and Southern California, but another Pacific storm takes aim at the northwest, so really heavy rain. Where you see those brighter colors, that's where we're seeing the heaviest amounts of rain, expecting anywhere from 3 to 7 inches of rain on top of a lot of rain that has already fallen over the past couple of weeks. Mountain snow up to 6 feet possible. Where you see those brighter colors, the pinks and purples, that's where we're expecting the highest amount. We're going to end in here because this is something we're concerned about as well. We don't see this often here. A threat for severe weather today could see a brief tornado or two. So this is something, guys, we're going to be watching very, very closely. Back to you.
We certainly hope everyone stays as safe as possible there. Michelle, thank you.
In other news, documents with classified markings that appear to be from the Obama administration were found at a think tank in D.C. that's tied to President Biden. The White House lawyer says the documents are currently being reviewed by the Justice Department and the National Archives. For more on this, let's bring in NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney. And Ken, good morning to you. So we know the documents were found days before the midterm elections. Walk us through how this discovery came to light and why we're just finding out about it now.
Good morning, Joe. Well, the White House hasn't answered that last question you asked, which is very important because had this been disclosed around the midterm elections, obviously it would have had a big impact. But what they are saying is that a small number of documents with classified markings were found in a locked closet at a think tank called the Penn Biden Center that Joe Biden created after he left the vice presidency and where he maintained office space before he became president. And they say that these documents were immediately turned over upon discovery and that now they are cooperating with a Justice Department inquiry. And we learned that the Attorney General has asked the U.S. Attorney in Chicago, who is a Trump appointee, to look into the question of whether a criminal investigation needs to happen here, Joe.
Of course, Ken, this comes 5 months after FBI agents executed that search warrant at former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. Dozens of documents with classified markings were found there. And the former president, he's been posting about this new case, but there are differences. I mean, how do these two discoveries compare, at least based on what we know right now?
There are huge differences, Joe. First of all, in the Trump case, they found 300 classified documents in total between the search and the subpoena. And there's some evidence that Trump and the people around him resisted efforts by the government to turn those documents over, in contrast to the Biden team, which self-reported immediately upon finding them. Generally, in a criminal context, self-reporting is exonerating, whereas it's the opposite in the Trump case. They seem to be resisting efforts to turn. The government still doesn't know whether they have all the classified documents that were taken from the Trump White House. So big differences here, but I think politically that may not necessarily matter in terms of how people view these two cases.
Yeah,
Joe.
that brings me to the next case. Despite those differences, we know Republican Kentucky Congressman James Comer, who's the new chair of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, is planning to request more information about what's been found. So what can we expect there, especially with Republicans now controlling the House? And then what are now the steps in this, Department of Justice investigation?
So in terms of the DOJ, this Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in Chicago is reviewing the question, essentially, of whether a special counsel needs to be appointed to go forward with a criminal investigation. But in terms of what the Republican Congress is going to do, look, these House Republicans are going to investigate every aspect of the Justice Department. They've already said that. And the Justice Department is prepared to resist turning over any documents relating to pending criminal investigations. That's been their policy for years, or any pending matter whatsoever. So we can expect a big clash there. But as long as Joe Biden is president, the Justice Department doesn't have to turn over anything, really. So it's going to be a sort of a political fight between House Republicans and the DOJ in terms of what documents they see. But no doubt this and other things will be big matters for oversight by the House Republicans, Joe.
We're seeing a lot of this over the next couple of years. All right, Ken, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
To Capitol Hill now, where House Republicans have approved a new rules package for Congress. And just like during the votes for Speaker, Kevin McCarthy had to make some last-minute deals to get far-right members of his party in line. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us now from Washington, D.C. to help explain it all. Good morning, Ali. These rules are going to govern how the House operates going forward. Walk us through the deals going on behind the scenes and ultimately what ended up in this new rules package. Setting up a rules package at the start of a new Congress isn't normally this contentious, but then again, neither is electing a new speaker. So what makes this Congress so different?
Yeah, usually the speaker race doesn't go 4 or 5 days and delay them an entire week. But of course, we know that that's why they're starting a week late on this rules package, on actually putting together the chairmen and chairwomen of their committees. All of this is stuff that should be done at the very outset of Congress. And I guess technically that's what they're doing. But look, many of the things that are in this rules package are things that we know are already in there, in part because some of them were negotiated as Kevin McCarthy was trying to get the votes for speaker. Even if you pull up on the screen a whole list of bullet points, the one that we often talk about is the idea that it's easier to oust the speaker now. Only one member can call for that vote, and it would go to the floor with a simple majority. But there are a lot of other key things in here, especially when it comes to who is sitting on certain committees. The conservative House Freedom Caucus was able to get themselves some very prime slots on key committees like the Rules Committee, the Appropriations Committee, all places that have their hands on the levers of who gets funding and how money is spent. But then there are, of course, also some procedural items here, too. Things that might not seem very important actually could end up being important, especially if it's on a tight deadline, the way that Congress typically likes to operate. For example, there's one rule that was pushed for by people like Congressman Chip Roy that says 72 hours have to elapse between the time that a bill is presented and the time that it is voted on. 72 hours in Congress time, especially when they are on a deadline, can make things really tight and really messy. But of course, for a lot of these conservatives, the point was to really slow down the process. And in this rules package, you see, they did that.
And so, Ali, Speaker McCarthy made a lot of side deals to jockey his way into the chair, as you mentioned. While he hasn't released all those assignments, committee assignments seem to have played a large part in getting members of his party on board. What can we expect as those assignments are made public?
Yeah. We're going to see a lot more members of the Conservative Freedom Caucus on these key committees. As I was just saying, McCarthy was not dealing with handing out gavels. That was really important because that would really draw the ire of his rank and file members. But he was dealing with who gets to sit on some of these committees. And again, the important part for conservatives was that they would get to have a voice and a role on committees where money was being spent, where oversight was being done. When you especially look at who's going to be on this all-important Rules Committee, no bill can go to the House floor without first passing through the Rules Committee. When it comes to contentious bills, having Conservative Freedom Caucus members there who could theoretically band together with Democrats and stop bills from coming to the floor, make that process messier, all of that is going to be really important as we consider how this 118th Congress is just going to function.
All right, Ali, thank you so much for all that information.
In Brazil, authorities are now investigating Sunday's extraordinary attack on government buildings by supporters of former President Bolsonaro. Yesterday, soldiers and police restored order to the capital and dismantled a camp where many of the rioters had been based. NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas joins us now from Miami with the latest on all this. So, Guad, Brazil's President Lula has been very critical of the military for what happened over the weekend. What's he saying about that, and just what's the latest on the ground right now?
Joe, good morning. This camp that we just saw images of is a few miles away from the area with these federal buildings that were invaded by the protesters, the Congress building, the Supreme Court building, and, of course, the presidential palace. So Lula da Silva has criticized all security forces who are in charge of that federal area of the capital, Brasilia, asking why these protesters were allowed to get so close to the federal buildings and then eventually enter them, causing that destruction that we saw. So part of the investigation will look into the actions of the police force that was in charge of that area. Here's Lula speaking about this subject.
There
are almost 1,500 people in jail, and they are going to be in jail until we finish the investigation. And it's important that people know that we will not stop investigating those who are possibly victims, who were just tools, those who possibly received food and help to come here to protest. Because those in charge certainly didn't come here, and we want to know who financed. Who paid?
A visibly upset Lula. Every time he has spoken about what happened, he gets very emotional. One of the other things she said is that there's people behind that finance all of this to be able to happen, and that investigation, of course, continues. The Minister of Justice in Brazil has spoken, and it's very important, Joe, to mention after all this discussion of former President Jair Bolsonaro being in the U.S. and whether he could be extradited or not, federal authorities yesterday, the Minister of Justice said there is no criminal process against Jair Bolsonaro, and that's why there is no order to extradite him, and at the moment there's no plan to extradite him or ask to extradite him from the United States.
I do want to ask you more about the ex-president Bolsonaro, Guad. I mean, we understand he's being treated for abdominal discomfort related to a stabbing he suffered back in 2018. That is according to his wife. Bolsonaro even tweeted a picture of himself saying that the hospital is in Orlando, in Florida. So do we know what his condition is and how long he's planning to stay in the U.S.?
Right, so here's the photo that he tweeted. So Bolsonaro was stabbed in 2018. He shared information yesterday on social media here indicating that he's undergone 5 surgeries since that stabbing. He says that as a result of the surgeries that he's undergone, he's had what's called intestinal adhesions. He's got a new adhesion. This is an issue with the stomach, with the intestines, that people sometimes have after they undergo any type of surgery in the abdominal bag, and that's what he's dealing with in the hospital. We knew that Jair Bolsonaro had left Brazil when he was still president, came to Orlando. We saw videos on social media where he appeared to take photos with his supporters. Then yesterday, his wife shared the information that he had been admitted to a hospital, and now he is sharing more information as he continues to recover. That's the latest we have, and this is coming from him, Joe.
All right, Guad Venegas in Miami. Guad, thank you.
Buffalo Bills defensive player Demar Hamlin is back in Buffalo this morning, 1 week after suffering cardiac arrest on the field during a game against the Bengals. In a tweet, Hamlin said he was grateful for the care he received while recovering in a Cincinnati hospital before being transferred to a hospital in Buffalo, where he's continuing his recovery. The 24-year-old has made big progress since his collapse. Just 3 days after the incident, Hamlin's breathing tube was removed and he was able to walk his first lap. He was also able to cheer on his Bills during their thrilling season finale victory on Sunday against the Patriots. This weekend, the Bills head to the playoffs with a wild card matchup against Miami Dolphins.
After days of leaked extracts and interviews, Prince Harry's highly anticipated memoir, Spare, is finally officially out today.
The book deals with the prince's challenges with the British royal family and makes a series of allegations about his relationship with his brother, Prince William, and father, King Charles.
For more on this, we are joined now by royal commentator Hillary Fordwich. Hillary, good to have you with us this morning. I mean, we've been talking about it for days, but the book is finally here. It's meant to be an attempt by Prince Harry to try and reclaim his narrative, get what he calls some accountability from the royal family, as he puts it. Do you think he's going to achieve that with this?
Well, pleasure to be back with you again. Thank you for having me. But I will say the phrase unintended consequences comes to mind. It's actually very sad, of course, reading this book, that obviously he suffered greatly at the loss of his mother, but to commercialize her in such a way, it is very sad. And there is word coming from the royal family, although, you know, those that know them and those that know members of the royal household, that they're very saddened by this beyond anything. And I think the overwhelming sentiment, and this has come directly from a source very close to the royal family, is that obviously the entire debacle after Brexit really did affect the health of the former Queen Elizabeth. And I think that is something that is of great pain to the royal family. And now the red line has been crossed with King Charles because Harry has denigrated Consort Queen Camilla.
Prince Harry did another interview yesterday with Good Morning America as part of the promotional tour. He was asked if he could see himself going back to the UK and returning to the royal fold. Let's hear his response.
I don't think it's ever going to be possible. I don't think that, you know, even if there was an agreement or an arrangement between me and my family, there is that third party that is going to do everything they can to make sure that that isn't possible. Not stopping us from necessarily going back, but making it unsurvivable.
Unsurvivable. That was the word he used there. What's your reaction to that, Hillary?
Yes, I mean, I agree with him on that point. But what I agree with is the fact that there has been, in history, no other member of the royal family has betrayed such confidences. He even published, in the book, there are some text extracts from conversations between Meghan and now the Princess of Wales, the former Kate Middleton. I mean, this is a real betrayal of privacy. And the greatest irony is when he talks about leaks, who has done the greatest amount of leaking here. And he knows that the royal family does tend to not respond directly. I think the biggest point here and the biggest bombshell is that he's actually put himself in grave danger. In all seriousness, this is not anybody's opinion. Given that the Taliban has responded to his count kill of 25, the actual Taliban, and overnight the breaking news is from the university in Allahabad. There has been a protest because the students there, obviously many of them know members of the families of those that were killed by either Prince Harry or other British servicemen. He has put all of the royal family and his own family and even actually British servicemen in far greater danger. That is a big, no pun intended, bombshell.
And of course, that is a huge issue that goes beyond some of the allegations that he's made about the royal family. Hillary, while we have you, I also want to note, I mean, King Charles's biographer, Catherine Meyer, said in an interview with the British newspaper The Observer that Harry's book could, quote, mark the beginning of the end for the monarchy. Do you agree with that? Is that a possibility?
Well, it's not my opinion to speak on that. I'm not going to speak even for the British public, but I will let the YouGov poll speak to that. His approval rating now has plummeted, and it's very sad, actually, what he's squandered. He was beloved by the nation. Now, the only person with a lower approval rating is Prince Andrew. We all know the debacle there. I will say, again, to end on what I began with, unintended consequences, he has actually helped Prince Charles and Prince William because they are seen as taking the high road and being dignified. And last but not least, the most important thing about the British royal family is they are there, misconception by Harry, to serve the British public. And that's what they continue to do. As long as they continue to do that, the British public in a constitutional monarchy will want them and will continue to fund them through taxpayer dollars.
All right, Hillary Fordwich, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. Coming up this hour on Morning News Now, a high-stakes summit, North America's most powerful leaders all meeting, and the contentious meeting that kicked it all off.
We'll take you inside President Biden's tense conversation with his Mexican counterpart and what's to come today as border crossings surge. That's up next.
Welcome back. President Biden is in Mexico this morning for the North American Leaders Summit.
Today, the Mexican president is set to meet with both Biden and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for the first meeting between the three countries since 2021. Joining us now is White House correspondent Monica Alba and Mexico Institute Board Co-Chair and Public Policy Fellow Ambassador Earl Anthony Wayne. Thank you both for being here this morning. Monica, let's start with you. Things got off to a heated start yesterday in the opening meeting between President Biden and the President of Mexico. Walk us through that and talk to us about what happened.
Yeah, this was a sharp exchange between the two leaders, Maya. And of course, the U.S. and Mexico have deep diplomatic and economic ties. This is a key ally, of course, regionally, but also in terms of some major issues. But AMLO, as he is called here, the Mexican president, did start off his remarks in this meeting by essentially saying that the United States hadn't done enough for Latin America. He said, quote, "You have the key in your hand," to President Biden, to providing more aid and assistance to the region. He wasn't just talking about Mexico, but other countries. And AMLO also argued that the U.S. was working too much with Asia in terms of producing some goods, that, again, he wanted that to return to the Western Hemisphere. But President Biden responded defending what the U.S. has done, saying, of course, our responsibility is to the world, not just one or two continents, and also saying that he has provided a lot of aid during his first 2 years in office, particularly to Latin American countries. Take a listen to how he laid that out.
You know, the United States provides more foreign aid than every other country just about combined in the world, to not just the hemisphere, but around the world. I wish we could just have one focus, only one focus. We have multiple foci, and so that's what we have to work on, and I'm confident we can do a great deal more in tandem with one another.
The president also raised the issue of fentanyl specifically coming from Mexico, and that is an area that the two leaders have pledged to work together on in the coming months and years. Maya and Joe.
Ambassador Wayne, let's bring you into the conversation here. Clearly, immigration is going to be a major topic at this summit. Last week, President Biden announced a new immigration policy that would send 30,000 migrants a month who entered the country illegally back across the border. Your reaction to that policy, do you think it's going to help stem the surge in border crossings?
Well, I think it is an important first step in that direction. I think it's trying to send a clear signal to those migrants who are on the move that they won't just be able to get to the border and claim asylum. The other part of that is the U.S. pledge to open legal pathways for these migrants to apply from their home countries and then come into the United States. But this has to be accompanied by cooperative steps by a number of countries across the region, and that will be discussed today when the three North American leaders get together. This is a massive flow from many countries, people fleeing authoritarian regimes, economic crises, crime, other things. The only way you're going to really start slowing this down is a whole series of acts where the United States acts, Mexico acts, and then other countries join in that. And so in that sense, that's where there really is partnership right at this moment with Mexico in these first steps, but it's just a beginning.
And Monica, today the Mexican president is set to be meeting with both President Biden and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as we mentioned, for several hours of talks. What's on the agenda?
Yeah, they're going to be talking, of course, about mass migration and border policy, as was just discussed. They're also going to be talking about some major global challenges like climate change, energy policy, and then, of course, the three leaders are going to come together and talk about things they can do when they work together. Of course, this is known as the sometimes called the Three Amigos Summit, which is a friendly description, but there was a hiatus during the Trump administration. These three leaders got back together in 2021. And that was all about repairing relationships. But now it really comes to actual work and deliverables. So they're going to be talking a lot about some economic initiatives and also empowering women. There's going to be a lot they're going to say can come out of this summit. But some critics often say there's a lot of talk and a lot of promises. What actually comes out of it, we'll have to see down the line.
All right. Monica Alba and Ambassador Earl Anthony Wayne, thank you both for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
More international news now as China makes its first retaliatory move against countries imposing new COVID-19 travel restrictions.
NBC's Raf Sanchez joins us from Tel Aviv with that and other world headlines. Raf, good morning.
Joe, Maya, good morning. Yeah, China had promised to retaliate against countries that impose new COVID travel measures on its flights. And now China is suspending visas for South Koreans in response to what it says are Seoul's discriminatory measures. South Korea, like the U.S., requires visitors from China to show a negative PCR test. China has the same requirement for visitors from all countries. In Peru, at least 17 people were killed in clashes when anti-government protesters attempted to enter an airport. The protesters are demanding the resignation of the current president and the release of the former president, who was arrested on charges of rebellion after he tried to dissolve the country's Congress. And finally, it wasn't even a small step for man. An attempt to launch the first ever satellites from Britain has ended in failure. Sir Richard Branson's company Virgin Orbit attempted to launch the satellites from a converted Boeing 747. The plane took off without issue, but the rocket carrying the satellites failed and is believed to have burned out over the Atlantic. And guys, no word if the UK will ask Elon Musk and SpaceX for help with their next launch.
Yeah, or Jeff Bezos or any of the other flying billionaires who are out there. So, all right, Raf, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Coming up, it's sentencing day for the Trump Organization's former finance head, Alan Weisselberg.
After the break, we're going to take a closer look at how much prison time he could get and the future of the former president's business. That's next.
Welcome back. Former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg is set to receive his sentence today after pleading guilty to multiple tax fraud charges. The trusted Trump employee was part of what prosecutors call a scheme to help the Trump Organization avoid paying taxes for more than 15 years. Weisselberg personally failed to pay taxes on perks worth $1.7 million, like rent, cars, and private school tuition for his grandchildren.
NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos is here with a look at what to expect from today's sentencing. So, Danny, we know Weisselberg pleaded guilty last year, so remind us, how much is that going to impact the sentence? Could the judge say, nah, I'm going to add a few more years to this?
Oh, it makes a huge difference. He was looking at a maximum of 15 years. Now he's probably going to get the 5 months he agreed to in the plea deal. No reason for the judge to deviate from that. And he's going to ultimately get 3 months if he gets 100 days off or so for good time while he's staying at Rikers, which is not a nice place, but a significantly better deal than the original 15 years. And that's why I have to ask, if we take a step back, what have we learned? What have we really gained from this prosecution? I'm somewhat underwhelmed by the Manhattan DA's office here because ultimately Weisselberg, even though he cooperated, took the stand and said, Mr. Trump didn't know about any of this. This was all me being bad, being greedy. You've secured a conviction of companies, but what is that? That's really just a civil case. Can't put a company in prison. The Trump Organization is not going to Rikers. Instead, the government's going to get $1.6 million in fines, but they arguably wasted that in resources prosecuting Weisselberg and prosecuting the Trump Organization. And at the end, when the smoke clears, the main target, at least in the eyes of many, Mr. Trump himself, scot-free.
And so, Danny, you mentioned in the plea agreement, Weisselberg gave a testimony against the Trump organization. What were some of the things that we learned from that? And did that help lead to a guilty verdict against the company?
Right. He gave evidence against the Trump organization, but really by giving evidence against himself, by turning to the jury and saying, essentially, I'm a high-ranking official in the Trump organization, and I deceived the organization to give myself perks and avoid taxes, and that avoidance of taxes also benefited the Trump organization. In other words, by taking these benefits sort of off the books, the Trump organization avoided payroll taxes. I keep saying Trump organization, but it was really two sub-companies, one of which was the Trump payroll company. But the bottom line is, by taking the stand and testifying against his own interest, he also helped secure the conviction against the Trump companies because he was a boss, so to speak, a high-ranking person.
So we talk about the civil case with the Trump organization. We're just days away from the sentence there. You talked about this $1.6 million. I mean, is that what we expect the sentence to be? And how much is this going to impact, if at all, the business moving forward?
Well, what's interesting is, will it really affect the business? $1.6 million? I'd rather think a Trump company can handle that. And by the way, the entire time, Weisselberg has been paid by these companies. He may not remain an official employee, but he's still getting compensated. So as, again, the smoke clears, Weisselberg still making considerable compensation package from the Trump companies. The Trump organization ends up losing $1.6 million. And Mr. Trump himself was never in court.
All right. Danny Cevallos, thanks so much for breaking it down. We appreciate it. Coming up, it is day 2 on the picket lines for thousands of nurses in New York City.
We'll bring you their stories and issues as hospitals struggle to staff up for patients in need. That's next. You're watching Morning News Now.
We're back with day 2 of the nurse strike in New York City. Thousands of nurses walked out of 2 major hospitals saying low pay, long hours, and minimal staffing are causing many of them to feel burned out.
Many say patient care is also at risk because of the conditions they're forced to work in.
NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard joins us now from outside Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City with the very latest on all this. Vaughn, good morning to you. So we're now in day 2 of the strike. Remind us, why are these 2 sides at an impasse, and what are you hearing from nurses right there on the front lines of this strike?
Yeah, good morning, guys. We're now at 24 hours in which this impasse is taking place. Negotiations continue not only here at this Upper East Side of Manhattan hospital, but also as well as a hospital in the Bronx. We're talking about nearly 7,000 nurses who are now on strike here. Resources have had to been shifted to these facilities from public and private agencies as they try to make up for the absence of these nurses inside of these hospitals. But I want to let you hear from Amanda Smith. She is one of those nurses here who I met yesterday evening, who is on the front lines of this picket. Take a listen to part of our conversation.
We're here for our patients. You know, they say safe staffing saves lives, and the nurses working at Mount Sinai are working under bad patient to staff ratios, so we're here for better staffing conditions.
And just about an hour ago, the Nurses Association here in New York City tweeted, "Can't stop, won't stop until we get a fair contract." The nurses who we've had conversations with over the last 24 hours insist this is more than compensation, but this is about the staffing shortages inside. And you heard Amanda note there that the ratio of patients to nurses is too high and that they need backup. Guys?
So, Vaughn, with over 7,000 nurses on strike and both hospitals full of patients without care, how is the State Department of Health handling the lack of nurses inside these hospitals?
Right. That's where the New York City Mayor Eric Adams said yesterday that they were making sure that these hospitals were addressing the staffing shortages, turning to public and private agencies to bring in, for instance, traveling nurses here. But also they have canceled elective surgeries at these 2 facilities. They have also directed ambulances away from these 2 medical centers. You know, we heard from a new mother yesterday with the child who's in PICU, and they had to actually take the mother and the child to a different hospital facility. But I want to let you just look at a part of a statement here from the New York Department of Health here, in which they say, quote, "The department has deployed surveyors to the affected hospitals to ensure adequate health care resources are maintained to meet the needs of the community, to review and enforce required minimum staffing levels here." The attention here from not only the city, but there's also attention from the state here in the heart of New York City.
Yeah, let's talk about the state. We know Governor Hochul called on the nurses to go to arbitration. How did the nurses Nurses Association respond to that request from the governor?
Right. The night before this strike went into effect, Joe, it was Governor Kathy Hochul who called on the two sides to meet in binding arbitration, essentially having these two sides work out a deal with an arbiter. But ultimately, it was the Nurses Association that declined that offer. And you heard from the hospitals that pushed back against the Nurses Association, saying that they've left not only a good deal, a good fair contract on the table, but now are also declining this binding arbitration that the governor put forward here. That is really leaving to questions as to what the Nurses Association wants here from the hospital. The Mount Sinai Hospital here yesterday put out a statement saying that the deal that the Nurses Association has in front of them is a good one, and that they are the ones that are leaving their patients out in the cold and in need. These are tough negotiations that have real life impacts, but the nurses insist that they're doing it to ensure that there's better long-term care for those very patients.
All right,
guys.
Vaughn Hilliard here in New York. Vaughn, thank you so much.
It's time now for our weekly mental health check-in. We're taking a closer look at how the collapse of Buffalo Bills player Demar Hamlin may have impacted players and staff members on the field.
Plus, schools are moving away from traditional discipline tactics to put a greater focus on mental health.
Let's bring in Dr. Robbie Ludwig for more on this. She is a psychotherapist and award-winning reporter. Good morning, Dr. Ludwig. Let's start with the case of Demar Hamlin. Millions were watching when Hamlin collapsed on the field, but the players also had a really emotional response to the tragedy. Now some fear they may be at risk for PTSD. What symptoms should they be watching out for, and what can they do to manage those symptoms?
So PTSD is when a traumatic event happens and your world no longer feels safe or predictable. Sometimes this means having nightmares, intrusive thoughts, not being able to feel safe, increased sometimes anxiety or depression too can be a part of it. And I think what's most important is that these players know if they are having this kind of response, it's completely understandable. It does not mean that they're weak. Many times sports guys are encouraged not to show emotion, but they do have psychological help available to these players. And I think talking in a group, allowing them to know that if they are having these kinds of intrusive reactions, it's understandable, there is treatment available, and talking about it, I think, as a group would be tremendously healing for all of them.
Let's talk about this discipline issue we mentioned a moment ago. The Wall Street Journal reports that more schools are opting out of suspensions for students. Instead, they're looking to address some of the underlying mental health issues for those who are struggling. Talk about, what kind of impact can suspensions have on kids, and what kind of support should they be getting?
Well, just like with any punishment, it can send the message to a student that they are bad, not their behavior, but that they are bad. And they internalize this kind of shame, and it doesn't really help them to experience themselves in a good way or with high self-esteem. If you're disciplining in the school, now I don't know how teachers feel about it, because it means that they may have to double up as thinking like a therapist in addition to a teacher, but any kind of acting out is the reflection of an underlying issue. So this seemed to me more of a kinder approach, where you have a child who at that age doesn't necessarily understand cause and effect, look at the impact their behavior has, to find out what is good about themselves. So it keeps a child's self-esteem intact and may help underlie or discover certain depressive issues or traumatic issues or anxiety issues. So I do really like this approach if teachers have access to that kind of training.
And finally, we want to highlight some support for new moms out there. The maternal mental health hotline was first launched in May of last year, but it received funding through December's spending bill. What sort of help can mothers get from the hotline, and why is it so needed?
Well, access to care is very difficult. So even if somebody wants some type of support or mental health support, sometimes finding the right caregiver in a timely manner is a lot more challenging than we really realize. And so new moms are very vulnerable emotionally and physically, hormonally. Sometimes they have very scary thoughts. they feel that they're not being a good enough mom, or sometimes physically they're just having experiences that are overwhelming. And then add exhaustion on top of that, and we have the perfect storm. So having access to care and culturally sensitive care is so key for new moms. And I support it. I think it's wonderful. And if we can continue to fund these kinds of programs, I think we'll see the benefits moving into the future.
Sounds like some great new programming out there. Dr. Robbie Ludwig, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, it was a bulldog beatdown in college football last night.
Yeah, that's right. Georgia demolished. I don't even know if there's a word for what happened last night. Number 3 TCU to cap off an undefeated season. And that's not all they accomplished. We've got the championship highlights next. There is a new challenge for thrill seekers here in New York, a skating rink in the clouds. Tourists can now glide across Manhattan's skyline with the opening of Sky Skate. This newest attraction, located at Manhattan's Hudson Yards, takes heights to a new level. Literally, the rink is slated to be about 1,100 feet above the ground. It is the highest rink in New York City, but instead of ice, skaters will be sliding across a synthetic material called glice. Now, I took on a sort of similar challenge a little over a year ago when I suited up to scale the edge observation deck there at Hudson Yards. Get this, there was no barrier. I was about 1,200 feet above the ground, just a little bit higher than the new Sky Skate, leaning out over the city. There you see it. So we're going to have to see if I'm up for this new challenge. The good news is I don't have to do that again. The bad news is I'm a horrible ice skater. Are you a good ice skater at all?
I can ice skate,
You can.
but I'm wondering what was going through your head up there when you were looking out.
It was, you know, after you got through the initial putting yourself out there, then it was kind of calming once you were there. But it was something to be 120 stories up and looking out over the city and then looking down.
I love that. I love that. Maybe we should go with Savannah. We should go try the ice
We'll
rink
do
out.
that. We'll do the
glice.
skating. That seems a little easier. Yeah, sliding on glice. All right. Now to college football, which wrapped up its season last night in an unreal fashion. It was a bulldog bonanza.
Georgia became the first state in the brief history of college football playoffs to win back-to-back titles with a 65-7 blowout over Texas Christian. The front page of this morning's Atlanta Journal-Constitution reads simply, too good. For more, we're joined by college football writer for The Athletic, Andy Staples. Andy, thank you so much for being here. So if you're a Georgia fan, you're feeling pretty good this morning, but a 65-7 score line isn't the most entertaining game in the world for everyone else. What happened last night, and what were your takeaways?
Well, this is about what we expected. If you follow how these teams acquire their players, Georgia has the best collection of talent in the country, and it's really not that close. The types of teams that can compete with Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, and you saw it when Ohio State played Georgia in the Peach Bowl, very close game. Ohio State had a field goal to win it at the end. But TCU was kind of the Cinderella story, and unfortunately, the carriage turns into a pumpkin usually when that happens.
Yeah, the Cinderella story did not end with a Cinderella closure there. So no one wants to see this happen again. Next year is going to mark the final year of this 4-team college playoff. Then we're going to see a 12-team expansion coming in the 2024-2025 season. Do you think that will ensure a more competitive championship, so we see Georgia playing perhaps a team like an Ohio State or someone that can match up with them?
It certainly won't hurt because, I mean, you still have blowouts in the Super Bowl, but it's the NFL playoffs are designed to make sure the two that survive to the end are pretty darn good. And that's kind of what the 12-team playoff is going to do. If there'd been a 12-team playoff this year, you would have seen this game maybe in the semifinals. And then on the other side of the bracket, you would have had some really good teams. You would have had Alabama and Ohio State and Michigan, and maybe one of those teams comes out. And now, look, TCU beat Michigan. So it's not that TCU didn't earn its way in. They certainly did, especially given the system that was in front of them. But the chances are you'd probably have seen Georgia, Alabama, or Georgia, Ohio State in a national title game at the end of that 12-team playoff.
So speaking of next year, Andy, do you think Georgia will make it a three-peat? Who should we be keeping an eye on?
It's so hard. Georgia is going to be in the mix. I'll tell you right now, they have a lot of great players. They lost 15 players to the NFL draft last year and still wind up having maybe even a better team. But lots can happen. In the SEC, you've still got Alabama. LSU's good. Tennessee had a great year this year, and they've got a quarterback they're very excited about in Joe Milton. In the Big Ten, Ohio State's always good. Penn State had a great season, and they've got some really good young players. who haven't gotten a chance to really play at the elite level yet. And I think now they're going to do it next year.
All right. We'll see what happens. Andy Staples, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We really do appreciate it. And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.